Hello and welcome to today's Gorkana webinar, 5 for PR and comms teams when monitoring and analysing social media. My name is Philip Smith and I'm the Head of News and Content at Gorkana, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this 40-minute webinar on social media and comms and how to prioritise your monitoring and analysis. As we know, social media touches on many areas within a business, from customer services to marketing campaigns to reputation management. A myriad of tools are available to help business monitor social media, manage interactions and publish content to social channels. But what role should PR and comms play in the process? If another team is looking after social, does that mean PR teams can leave it alone to focus on traditional media? So we're going to look at 5 areas where social media monitoring and analysis should form a key part of a PR team's responsibilities, regardless of whether or not other parts of the business are also paying attention to it. I'm delighted to say that to tackle the subject and give us 5 top tips is my colleague Alistair Wheat. Alistair is the head of digital at Gorkana. Alistair joined Gorkana in 2012 and spearheads the social media insights team. With 9 years experience in online media monitoring and media insights, Alistair has deep expertise both at a technical level and in providing consultative advice to clients. He's the lead consultant for the DEFRA social media monitoring and horizon scanning service, which was awarded Gold and Platinum Awards at the 2014 AMIC Awards. And he works on Samsung's Voice of the Customer social media listening program, which again won 2 golds at the 2015 AMIC Awards. Alistair, welcome to the webinar.
Hi, good afternoon.
Over the next 20 minutes, Alistair is going to introduce his 5 key tips for monitoring and analysing social media. He'll talk us through them in turn, and of course he'll answer a few questions. But we'll also make sure that we have plenty of time at the end for your questions as well. If you have questions for us, please ask them, but also you can use the hashtag GorkanaSocial on Twitter, and we'll pick up questions from there as well. First of all, though, we're going to start with a poll. And with that, we're going to start with a question, which is, how far ahead do you plan your social media content calendar? So we've got 4 options for you to answer. Some of you may not have a content calendar in place. Some of you may only be doing this annually, some quarterly, and some 1 month ahead. So pick the section that's valid for you. And as I can see you're voting, as you're voting, I will monitor that and then talk you through the results. Great. Thank you everyone for voting, and I shall share those results with you now. I think we have a definite winner, Alistair. We've got 41% are 1 month ahead, so that's good to see. Next is 35% who don't have a content calendar. Then we have 14% of you who've responded to this who are quarterly, and then 10% of you who are doing this annually. I'm sure Alistair's got a lot of tips that will relate to the timing of your content, so we'll use that as context for when he's answering those questions. Anyway, thank you very much for voting on that. We're going to start with our first tip now. The first tip is understand how the public might react to a story in social media. Alistair, over to you.
So thanks very much for that intro and the kind words, Phil. Hopefully I've not been picked up too much there. Just before I actually go into this point, I just wanted to state a little bit why I thought it would be good to look at these sort of 5 points. I've been in the space for about 9 years now and speaking with a variety of people in comms, and the conversation can vary quite a lot in terms of what they say when the actual subject comes up. And I do find it both disappointing, I suppose also a bit frustrating sometimes when I hear common people saying, oh no, social's looked after by another team in the business. And that may be true, you know, that there is another team, like a team actually called social media team, or it could be marketing, or it could be campaigns, or sometimes it could even be an agency that's looking after it. And sometimes the PR team then kind of almost wash their hands of social, and they think that they just need to focus on really media relations, dealing with sort of the traditional media, and they'll leave social to someone else. And that means that, you know, another team will be maybe posting stuff on the social channels, looking at the responses, or even producing reports on it. And there may be little to no actual engagement with social. That's not always the case. But even when it isn't the case, sometimes there's more that the comms team could actually do in terms of understanding social. So the first point I want to look at is more of a kind of a general point here about just the fact that the comms teams need to be immersed and up to speed with what's going on social, just to understand how things actually work and to be savvy about especially how a brand's reputation can be kind of very quickly killed if they get things wrong. There are loads of examples of businesses who have, kind of been held to account, I suppose, especially on Twitter, which is in a very active and kind of almost sort of self-righteous kind of community, isn't it? And very quick to kind of take people to task or brands to task. And there are loads of examples where brands have been slow to respond. So today I want to look at actually a positive example of what I think was actually a relatively good example of a brand being aware of social and actually dealing with an issue. So we saw obviously earlier in the autumn, October 31st, when this Russian airline got shot down coming out of Sharm el-Sheikh, and 244 people tragically killed, and initially people weren't sure what it was, and then it soon came up, transpired that it really was a terrorist attack. And as a result of that, there were thousands of British holidaymakers trapped in Sharm. Worst places to be trapped, but still, it's tough sort of being stuck there and not knowing how you're going to get home. And a lot of those were passengers of EasyJet. So this is a story, just an example from the 8th of November. This is from the Liverpool Echo of the family all looking pretty sad there. Even the little girls looking sad. They're stuck in Sharm. They don't know how they're going to get home, and there's been confusion about when these flights are going to come back. The particular challenge, I think, for EasyJet, this is always a bad thing to happen anytime. I'm glad at least it wasn't one of their jets, thank goodness. But still, their passengers are stuck there. But it could have been, timing couldn't have been much worse really for them, because they were just about to launch a campaign due to their 20th anniversary. And so they had this big launch come up. So the 10th of November 2005 was when EasyJet actually began. And so this was coming up to their 20th anniversary. They had loads of big PR activity planned. They had a new jet. They were launching new uniforms, loyalty scheme, as you can see in this story. And this could have actually been a massive disaster, because if they hadn't handled the Sharm el-Sheikh incident well, and then gone on and say, well, let's just forget about all these people stuck in, and we're going to go and have a party, it could have really blown up in their face. So I think they needed to respond to the incident anyway, but all the more because they were about to do something positive. And I actually think that EasyJet thankfully had a comm-savvy CEO. They actually came. Carolyn McCall came from the Guardian previously. She was aware of the media, and they actually got on the front foot with this. And within minutes of the actual plane crashing, they got the exec team together to start planning the response. And this is a quote from an article from the FT, where she said, regardless of what the cause of the air crash was, we had to know what the facts were, as we had 4,500 passengers out there. And so EasyJet were proactive. They got on with this. And I'm not saying that this is specifically just because they were worried about the reaction on social, but this is the sort of thing that social media could have really been a disaster for them, by going out and just trying to do business as usual, stick with your PR calendar, go ahead with your event, kind of let's just forget about what's happened over there, stick with our planning, because that is sometimes what you see happen when you've got brands that just plow on with their pre-planned activity regardless of what's actually happening. Whereas I think when Carolyn was actually out talking to the media, a lot of what she said was focused more on getting passengers home rather than blowing the trumpet about their 20th anniversary. So, and as a result, I think it could have gone horribly wrong, but she actually then was selected as the most admired leader in Britain by sort of a peer review, and I think that again just sort of is testament to actually good handling of a PR event that could have really blown up. So the message for PRs is just be aware of how these things actually pan out, good or bad. I thought for a change, normally these webinars we always love to look at the train crashes. I'd actually look at an example where it wasn't a train crash, but PRs need to be aware of how these things actually work, and then be mindful of that when they just have their own calendar of activities, and maybe not just doing what they were planning to do, and adapt that as a result of what's going on around.
Alistair, you've explained that very clearly. One of the things that I think must be occurring to a few people is, at which point do you decide to stop your social media campaign or stop publishing because of a tragic event or something that is taking charge of the news agenda? Or when do you just simply tone it down or do something different? At which point do you say, actually, we can't go ahead, we should stop what we're doing?
This also kind of feeds back into a point I'm going to make later as well, is that you need to kind of use social to kind of get an understanding of, and also just general media monitoring to understand how people are reacting to your response, and whether people feel that generally you're doing things right or wrong. And Twitter especially is really good for telling you when you're screwing up. And so if you are trying to say we are trying to get passengers home, we're sending out jets to pick people up, there was some confusion about then having to then come back, but it wasn't really their fault. But you could kind of see from the social conversation that people weren't really gunning for them. If it had been the case that the public were really furious about it, then the wise thing would have been to really sort of scale back their sort of PR activities around the anniversary. So it's a case, there's no sort of formula to it. It's really this is what PR people are there for, right? Is to have that kind of gut instinctive feel about whether or not they should do something or say something. And so in this instance, it's good they've got a CEO who's savvy and aware of that. But PRs don't always have that luxury, and they have CEOs who need to be really coached. So just be aware of how these things can go horribly wrong, and assess it on an hour-by-hour basis as you go through a day.
And on this point, just one quick question from me, which is, how forgiving do you think the social media audience is? There's clearly unexpected events that happen. Do you think that brands are treated with less tolerance because, of course, they're trying to give out marketing messages often?
Yeah.
Or do you think there is some point where you just say, actually, people aren't very forgiving about this at all?
I think, especially on Twitter, they are brutal. And British people on Twitter are even more brutal. We love to go and just sort of smash a brand, and so it's very easy to destroy your reputation, right? It takes years to build it up, and you can ruin it very quickly. So always kind of almost assume, especially if you're a public brand and it's a massive top news story, assume the worst, I'd say, and be very, very cautious. But sometimes, I've seen the other situation happen where, a brand will get their knickers in a twist, or a PR team will get their knickers in a twist over just a couple of tweets. But don't get worried just by a couple of people saying stuff. There's always going to be idiots out there. But if you can see it really getting traction and a large amount of people, if you start trending on Twitter, then you're really going to be concerned.
And again, your overall message for all of this is be aware of what's happening. You cannot ignore this. You need to have the context. You need to see what's happening in social.
Yeah, and also just to keep an eye. I mean, I several times every day will just look at what's trending on Twitter, and especially look at any kind of corporate stories in there. And if you do see a corporate situation trending on Twitter, follow it. Just learn how that whole process works, how this whole cycle works, and then look at what that brand does, good or bad, in terms of responding to it.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very useful advice. Shall we move on to our second point now?
Yes.
So the second tip here is social media is not democratic. Not all customers are equal.
Yes. So a lot of businesses now have got dedicated customer services teams. They may have a dedicated customer service Twitter handle, and people will say something about a brand, and then there'll be a person who will then respond to it, and there's various kind of workflows and tools that are designed to help do that. That's all well and good, but from time to time you may get a customer who actually shouldn't be dealt with by the customer services team, and the corporate reputation team or the PR team needs to be involved. So here's an example, or still in the airlines industry, where Sachin Tendulkar had some problems because his family's baggage got lost, and tickets were not confirmed properly. So angry Sachin tweets to British Airways, and the British Airways customer services team respond back, "We're sorry to hear this, Sachin. Could you please DM us your baggage ref full name and address so we can look into this for you?" Now, if you're wondering who is Sachin Tendulkar, be careful not to go to Twitter and tell everyone that you don't know who he is, because apparently, he's a top-class Indian cricketer, and his nickname in India is God, and he's got millions of followers on Twitter. And unfortunately, this poor customer service exec who just went and asked him for his full name, got more than they bargained for, and it actually ended up being a huge media story. And so this is an example of a story from the Indian Express, So it was massive in India and the UK and other parts of the world as well. So British Airways asked Sachin, his full name, Twitterati fume, are you serious? And there were hundreds of articles, so there's sort of about 5,000 articles about the story. It was the top trending term, British Airways was the top trending term in India, and he even had this sort of tweet from a leading Indian politician saying, "Dear British Airways, try Sachin Ramesh Tendulkar, India. I'm sure this is enough for your post for other postal service courier company here." And so this is a kind of, just the British Airways customer services team following the kind of due process, kind of template response. But they should have been mindful of who they're actually talking to, and the fact that they're just simply asking him for his name. They didn't say anything rude about it, right? But it was just a kind of template response. And it's situations like this where, and there are various different tools and ways of doing this, but I think that comms teams need to have some automated means to get notified when either a journalist or somebody who's got a large number of followers, or they're otherwise known to be important and influential, tweets to your customer service team or tweets about your brand. And they need to, like in this instance, the better situation would have been someone more senior at British Airways to go, whoa, 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 let's just not give them a template response and just chuck them into the, the normal kind of customer services program. Let's, maybe get someone more senior to pick it up and make sure that, Mr. Tendulkar is happy. So this is the sort of thing that I would say that, comms teams need to look at a way of having some kind of, and again, I would recommend that this is an automated process, just to at least get some kind of flag. They don't necessarily need to deal with it all, but there needs to be a better escalation process, especially for British Airways. But if you're a brand that has a customer services team in place, make sure that there's a way to kind of quickly get notified of that, because you don't want them to have to deal with 5,000 articles basically having a laugh at your expense about how you should have responded in a different way.
And how can you? I mean, I can understand that if you're a cricket fan, you feel that it's a ridiculous question not to know who Sachin is. But how, when you don't have context, can you gauge the power of an individual on social? Is it as simple as looking at the number of followers they have, or are there other ways of doing that?
So it's a bit of both. I tell you, anyone with over 1 million followers, you think, well, they've got 1 million followers for some reason, right? And you also kind of hope that the comms team would be more aware, just generally, of who's who in the world. And you don't need to be a cricket fan to know who Sachin is. It's kind of if you're Indian or English or from any country where cricket's played, you have a good chance you'll have heard of him. And but just generally, the comms team, I think, if you do see someone's name pop up and they look like they might be influential, there's no harm in doing a quick Google search, especially for some of the kind of younger pop celebrities. I'm doing that myself sometimes. I'm like, who is this person who's got 3 million followers? So it just at least to kind of get an idea of whether or not this requires some special attention.
Of course. And is it always possible to deal with this when you have an issue like this, that you deal with it online, or should you be looking at other channels and thinking about how else you might be able to deal with it?
Yeah, it doesn't always need to be online, and but even if it is, just a tweet back maybe from someone who's clearly a more senior exec would be a good thing. But if you can contact them more directly offline, that's probably sometimes a safer way, although it can be intrusive. It really depends on the actual nature of the incident and whether that person is very active on social.
Thank you. Shall we move on to our third point now, Alistair? Also, I'll remind everyone who's listening in that please send us your questions. We're about halfway through the webinar, and we will make sure we've got time for a couple of questions at the end. So do please send them in to us, and I will put them to Alistair on your behalf. Before we get there, let's look at point 3, Alistair's top tip, number 3, start at the core. Understand the motivations and actions of your main influencers, opinion formers, and target audience.
Okay. So in a business, if you have a team that is listening to social, they'll have different audiences that they'll be focused on. And for the PR team, there may be a significant overlap in that, but there also might be a slightly different audience. Especially journalists, we know, are very active on social. They use Twitter as a key part of their daily job. It's a tool for them. And so I would say that even if you have got other teams focusing on maybe building influencer relationships, make sure that you've got a good eye on what the people you're dealing with are actually doing on social. And so that can basically mean a more targeted listening exercise. You're not listening to everybody saying anything about your brand, but you do want to get what key audiences are saying, and it may not just be about your brand either. So it may be that you have got a bunch of journalists or academics or politicians or whoever it might be that are part of your sort of comms domain, and you actually want to check everything they're saying about the subject that you're dealing with. So not just your brand or competitors or other companies in the industry. So you're kind of broadening out the subjects that you're listening for, but you're narrowing down the actual audience that you're listening to, rather than just trying to listen to everyone talking about your brand. So this can be really helpful. So, for example, if you've got a target list of journalists and you've got a certain subject, that subject then comes up in the news. Quite often you'll see that people from subject areas or briefs that would normally talk about it will start getting involved and giving their own slant to it, so it can broaden out. So just want to give an example here from TalkTalk's recent troubles, and Rory Cellan-Jones from the BBC was very active in talking about it, following the story right through to then trying to catch the cyber hackers behind it all, and we discussed it in various took various different angles on the story. But if you're going to go and then say, I want to, maybe you're a cybersecurity firm, and you want to then capture or start to say something about this, you'd want to maybe see, well, who's talking about TalkTalk? So you could have a broad range of people who talk about related issues, but you may also just want to get a view of all of the journalists talking about TalkTalk. We've got an easy way of doing that actually in our Gorkana database product. If you have that, you can just go into topic search, but even if you don't have that, you can compile lists and various different listening tools. You can do that. You can build a list of people and then search through what they're talking about. So if you then go and actually look at who was talking about TalkTalk, you kind of have a mixture of sort of people. So we have Rory, who's a tech correspondent. We had then Matt Bryan from Engadget, Charles Christian, who writes on legal and IT issues, and Annie Shaw is actually a financial correspondent, and then Thomas Fox Brewster, who is talks on security and privacy. So you can see there's all kind of a link to the TalkTalk problem, but kind of a mixture of people with different beats. But these are the kind of the top 5 people who talked about it on Twitter. And sometimes actually going to Twitter is a better way of looking at or identifying people that you can engage with on the subject, because they're the ones actually interested in it right now. You may look at someone's brief or their biography in a journalist database, or from your own records, who's going to cover it, but they may or may not actually really be focused on that issue. So Twitter can be a very good way of just quickly diving in, understanding then whether your audience are talking about an issue, or if not, looking at who else outside of your core audience is talking about the issue, and then that can be a good chance for you to go in and engage directly with them.
Alistair, I think it's really important when you say that, to focus on your core audience. But what intrigues me is when you think of the range of audiences brands can appeal to, the size of that audience can be very big or very small. Yeah. Some brands have a very small, particularly in the B2B space, a small core audience. Some will have a much bigger one. Do you have a view on what's manageable? So if you would say to me, concentrate on your core audience, and I said, yeah, I think my core audience is about 10,000 people, is that a manageable amount of people to look at on Twitter, or do you have a view that actually it's about the tools that you use rather than the scale?
Yeah, well, I say, for the comms team, when I'm talking about core audience, I'm talking about, in a way, the core audience to reach the audience, right? So they're focusing on the content creators, the thought leaders, the people who actually, will come up with a new angle on an issue. And so that shouldn't be too large an issue, maybe 100 or 200 people maximum, really.
Yeah.
And then trying to understand really what are the themes that they're talking about on any given subject or given day, and you might want to then widen it out and sort of search within a wider database, but then make it very limited onto specific subjects.
And you're saying limit it by subject. You can limit it by sector, of course.
Yeah.
And then you can reach out beyond there.
Yeah, but I think always for the comms team to focus on the influencers and not just to go for the kind of general mass audience. So it's a different focus to maybe what their marketing team or a campaigns team might be doing. And again, influencers in the comms team may be seen differently as influencers in a sort of marketing team, where it may be that they're focusing more on bloggers, for example, whereas with this sort of the PR space, you're looking more at people who are paid to actually go and write on the subject.
Okay, excellent. Shall we move on to point 4, okay, and your 4th top tip? No medium is an island. Analysis of traditional media shouldn't be done in isolation and should include social.
Yeah, so this is kind of our kind of home turf, isn't it, really? So we're an analysis business. I've done various webinars on the subject before, so I'm not going to do any kind of case study on this, but I just want to make a few sort of key points on this one. So when you have different teams in a business looking at social, it's not uncommon to have various different forms of social media reports. And so sometimes when we go and we talk to a client about social as part of an analysis program, they go, oh yeah, that's been done by someone else. But quite often the focus when someone else is doing that is often on your own sort of social activity. So it is, you know, how many retweets did we get, how many followers have we gained in this month, or how many likes did we get on our Facebook page, how many views or impressions or whatever. And so I'd say that in that case, the focus for the comms team, if they're going to have social as part of their analysis program, it's not really on your own channels, it's not really on your own content, because it's probably the case that those are being managed by another team, and it really should be their responsibility to produce reports for what they're doing. Obviously, if you, and it might be, I'm sure some of the people listening to this phone, like we saw with the poll earlier, are actually the ones planning, you know, so what was it, nearly 2/3 of the audience do actually have a social media content calendar. So in that case, you probably do want to have some kind of reporting on the actual content that you're putting out. But again, that might be a separate channel. Perhaps you might have your own PR channel and it's different to your main brand channel. But for comms teams, the focus should really be on looking at social media to understand the public reaction to the news. So what do you learn by listening to social media conversations about what people think of all that nice PR coverage you've got, or the bad PR coverage you've got? So it's kind of giving a lens and greater insight into your, I suppose, regular, you know, media analysis. So your typical media analysis report will be on, you know, mainstream news coverage, maybe broadcast content, could include blogs, but the social then is a way of saying, right, well, we had all these articles, but what articles did people actually read? We don't know, well, we do know from some publishers how many they are starting to share that data, how many people actually read an article, but quite often they don't, and the only way we can really gauge the engagement is by looking at social shares. So that's a good way of looking at your content, is to say we've got, you know, hundreds of pieces of content, but actually there was 10 stories that really drove the engagement and the interest, and we need to look at social to understand that. It's also important to compare sentiments, because you might get nice positive PR coverage because you've got good relations with journalists, but because of that incident recently that you didn't handle well, going back to kind of the first point I made, people on social still remember that, and they still remember that you guys really screwed up on that incident before, you didn't look after customers, and yes, you've got this nice PR coverage again about this thing that you did, but we don't care, we haven't forgiven you for that thing you did wrong, and therefore we're just going to have another go at you. So you can, so some of this positive PR coverage can just kind of, you know, put sort of salt in the wound, some of in the public's mind, if they haven't forgiven you for something that you did wrong previously, and you can actually end up getting negative reactions on social. So that's why, you know, you need to look at the two side by side. The other thing is that when you're looking at discussions on social, you want to also again focus on the reaction of key influencers and experts in the industry, and that may be a sort of subsection that other people producing social reports aren't necessarily focusing on.
Okay. When you look at social and you look at other media channels, and in your opinion, is there any media channel that particularly has an influence on social? So for instance, do you think that television has a particular impact, or for instance newspapers, newsprint?
Yeah, so live events are quite, you know, a big theme because it's happening, people don't want to talk about it, especially if it's a live event that happens over kind of a long enough period of time for people to, so it's not just kind of a single kind of news flash. It would be, I don't know, like a Radio 4 today often something said on there that's wrong, that gives people time to react, you know, question time, again, another political kind of focused event, or it could be kind of an ongoing crisis, and then there's multiple kind of television events. So those tend to be the ones that have the biggest impact, is because there's a large number of people focusing on the same thing, and then when that hashtag appears on Twitter or people start sharing it on Facebook, people all know what it's about. It's just a general kind of vast awareness of an issue. But just generally, if it's online news, it's easy to share, and so online news, much more than print, is likely to have an impact. But you know, the overlap between those two media is you know, 80–90% now anyway.
Of course. So really, what you're saying is that broadcast media can have the potential to have a big impact on social, as well as anything that's happening online. Newsprint you know, it's a sort of one-off. It sets the agenda sometimes, and then people follow up.
The thing is, they're all really blurred in together, so it's more just the kind of scale of the story that matters rather than any particular channel that it's on. So it'll come across all channels if it's big enough.
Of course, of course. I do realise it was a slightly unfair question. You know, everyone looks at a media mix, but I'm always interested, and I know a lot of the sort of marketing bodies for different media channels are always championing different media. So I'm always interested in which ones do have an impact. Great, thank you, Alistair. Shall we move on to our final, the 5th point? And that is, be proactive. React to the news agenda to provide commentary and insight.
Yeah. So this is basically saying that social and being aware of how people are reacting to stories is actually an opportunity for comms people to go beyond their kind of schedule of content and actually react to something and say, hey, we've got something meaningful to say on this issue. Everyone else is talking about it. Let's join the fray. Let's get our voice heard. And it can, if it's done right and tactfully, again, you know, don't just dive in without thinking about it, but it can actually have a really positive example. So I just want to show an example here. Just wondered if people can figure out what the link is between a Manchester-based HR law firm and Zayn Malik, formerly of One Direction. Most people probably won't guess, but a few might. But early in the year, of course, you know, the tragic, heartbreaking news that he quit One Direction, and as a result of that, there were actually lots of people asking for compassionate leave from work. And because of that, a lot of employers were then thinking, well, hold on, what? Surely not. Do we need to give compassionate leave? Because so then they started contacting this business to ask whether that, you know, whether they had, you know, to do that or not. And then, as a result, one of the execs from this law firm, a guy called Alan Price, who at the time had, had a respectable number of followers on Twitter. I think it was sort of 1,000, 2,000, something like that. But then he knew a guy called Alex Bell at the Manchester Evening News. So they, he was based in Manchester as well, and he just sent a tweet to him saying, hard to believe, but we have received hundreds of calls from bosses whose staff requested compassionate leave from Zayn Malik leaving 1D. And as a result of that, then Alex Bell wrote about it in the Manchester Evening News, and kind of the story exploded from there. I mean, this tweet on its own had quite a few retweets. But then there were literally hundreds of articles all around the world. So there's over 131 articles specifically quoting Alan in them, and there were more beyond just talking about the story. Just how kind of ridiculous it was that people were trying to get time off work for compassionate leave because of Zayn quitting One Direction. And the story actually picked up in the Telegraph is actually from their employment law section. And so, the kind of right kind of audience reading that paper, and it's a sort of quirky, fun thing that your target audience would read. There's obviously loads of people who read it just because they're One Direction fans, or it's sort of a funny story. So it's not all like target audience, but still, it was a good story. And the interesting thing as well is that Alan Price, he now has got over 20,000 followers on Twitter. He's got lots of journalists, and this wasn't just a one-off. There was coverage later on in the summer. A guy in the Mirror obviously got in touch and has written an article about 14 of the best excuses for getting time off work during the summer. Things like, my dog is constantly drinking water, so I've got to go look after him. And this one here, my car won't operate in the heat. So, that's the sort of thing that, this is a small sort of law firm, not even a PR guy, so hats off to him for just taking the initiative, and he's got, sort of coverage a lot of PR people would dream of for that side of the business. And it was global as well. So just stay tuned to what's going on. There may be a story that you may never think of actually being an opportunity for you, but if you've got something pithy and relevant to say, by all means get out and say it, but also know who to talk to. So he actually had a journalist who'd also had built up some kind of rapport with this guy that he just didn't just get ignored. But make use of those opportunities. Do it tactfully as well. There are examples of people who try to dive in and kind of do the content marketing thing off sort of things that are inappropriate sometimes. Like when Steve Jobs died, there were all these companies trying to write thought pieces on how what his management style meant, etc. And that isn't always the appropriate time to do it. But make the most of these opportunities and just keep your finger on the pulse. I think it's the main message I want to.
And I think the thing that strikes me there also is this law firm, they're based in Manchester. It's not actually initially a Manchester story, but they've made it into that because they've said it's people in our area who are contacting us. They could have been based anywhere in the country. They could have had a national profile or a regional profile. It doesn't matter. They were proactive and targeted the right person who was going to listen to them initially.
Yes. And it wasn't just a one-off either. So there's been other stories, not on Zane, but on other issues that he's gone after this.
Great. I'm going to ask you one more question about that tip and the way that people should react to those type of opportunities. But before I do that, I just want to urge people, we do have 5 minutes left, so if you do have any questions for Alistair, please do send them in, and I will put as many of them as I can to him before the webinar finishes. Before I come to your questions, though, what I just wanted to see was how quickly can you react to a story like that? With your example of Zayn Malik leaving 1D, is there a sort of optimum time? Can people react too quickly to some things? Or is there a point at which you say, look, if you've left it a day, it's too late now to jump on that bandwagon?
It kind of depends whether people are still discussing it. And there is often a challenge as well that there's loads of people out there who just do sort of general kind of social media stats about how many people are talking about it, and it's kind of like if someone else has got there first, and even if your thing's interesting, you kind of missed the boat. So it's okay to kind of say something after the event's happened, as long as it's still new and it's not just repeating something that someone else has done. So I would say if it's not an immediate thing and you're a bit of time has passed, at least to try and see if someone's already made the same point. If it's completely died a death and no one's talking about it, then you probably have missed your opportunity. But provided there's still some residual interest, then and what you're saying is new, then go for it and get it out there. The thing with this guy from the law firm is that people had actually called him, so he was actually just sharing something that had happened. He wasn't just making something up or just having an idea. It was actually people calling him, but then he saw that was an interesting thing, and then he actually got out and told people about it.
Okay, excellent. Well, listen, thank you everyone for sending in your questions. The first question I'm going to read out, and I'm going to ask you, Alistair, but I'm going to give you some time to think about because it's quite a big one. And that's from Tom, who asks, what are your predictions for social media in 2016? So I look forward to hearing those in a minute. But before we come on to that, Kez has sent in a question which I think is really interesting and is where we came in about sort of who owns social. And the question is, in your opinion, in a perfect world, what is the ideal relationship between social and PR departments? How should they be working together to create the most impact and have the most holistic strategy? So, Alistair, what do you think about that relationship? And then I'll ask you for your predictions.
Yeah, so both good questions. Thanks, Kevin, Tom. So in terms of PR working with other departments, I think it is right, to have a team that is focused on social, especially if you've got a large volume of content in. And as a PR team, you don't really want to get sucked into kind of a tactical, blow by blow, so having to respond to everybody. And it is. I'm definitely not trying to say anything against having a team that deals with things and just replies to everybody if that's how you decide you want to go about doing that. I'm not trying to lecture anybody on sort of general kind of customer services on social, but there does need to be an awareness, I think, in the people who are doing that daily interaction of when things have kind of got to the kind of the level that they need some involvement from PR, and there needs to be an easy escalation point. They need to know who to go to and who to ask, and that the person in the PR team, whoever that contact point is, maybe you are the person, you are the PR team, but make sure that someone in the PR team is more savvy, or at least there's almost a kind of a like someone on point, so that if something does blow up, whatever the time of day might be, there's an escalation point there. And also just to have kind of clear guidelines for the social media team about, if X or Y happens, then don't just proceed as normal. Make sure you get some kind of input, or at least flag it to other people. And that does mean that there maybe needs to be more coaching, so that the PR team can actually be there as coaches to the social media teams, just to say, look, you guys are doing great. By all means, do what you're doing. We're not going to tell you how to make cool content, how to drive engagement, but we're the guys who know about reputation. We're the guys who look at things over the long term, and reputation is something that doesn't just immediately just build up, but it can be killed quickly. So please, if you think there's an issue, make sure that you talk to us about it and get us involved. So that's the main thing, is just to make sure there's a clear escalation point. But also just for the PR people, just to take it on themselves to actually just be aware of what's going on, and to not just be purely focusing on kind of individual posts of every single person talking about their brand.
Sounds like you're really putting the emphasis on internal communication, on those protocols, and also saying then there's a need sometimes for training and support.
Yes.
Excellent. Now, the big question, what are your predictions for social media in 2016? We have 2 minutes left, Alistair, so I expect you to give me a comprehensive answer.
I think that the main, this might be a bit of a cop-out, but I think that the main trends that we see from 2015 I see continuing in that there's going to be an increasing blurring of the lines between different forms of media, and also an increasing kind of reaction to events in social, because journalists are often looking to social to kind of gauge the reaction. It was actually quite interesting recently. Twitter switched off the API that they've got that shows the amount of times an article has been shared, or you can just ask Twitter for how many times an article has been shared, and publishers have that on their site. So you may have noticed if you go to a news article, it will show you the number of Facebook shares, but now it just doesn't show you the data for Twitter anymore. Now that's actually been really frustrating for publishers, because they like the information, it's very useful for them, and they often will reorganize the way that they work based on what they see happening in social. And I think publishers are getting increasingly smart and sophisticated in using social to give them a clue about what the hot stories are. And they are very sophisticated, I think far more sophisticated than corporates are in knowing what people are interested in and adapting their agenda as a result. So I think that trend's continuing. I think also with the sharing of content, Facebook has now started to actually give some data, the Facebook Pilot program, where we're able to actually get a bit more data about trends and how people are sharing content in Facebook. But at the same time, there are also more concerns about privacy. So I think we may be harder to get metrics on individual bits of content, unless it's your own content and you put it out and you're paying to do that. So there'll be, I think, two trends. One is that you'll get data if you're paying to advertise, and you'll get kind of anonymized mass data about sort of general trends. So again, I'm kind of answering this more from a point of view as an analyst. And some of the data that we get now might be harder to get, just in terms of popular content and stuff like that.
Excellent. Thank you, Alistair. That was a big question to try and answer in 2 minutes, and I think you absolutely did your best there, so thank you for that. I'm afraid, sadly, that's all we've got time for today, but I do want to say a very big thank you to Alistair for sharing his 5 top tips with us. I want to thank everyone who's been taking part in this webinar for listening in, and particularly for those of you who've sent in your questions. If you have any more for us, you can use the hashtag Gorkana Social. You can also get hold of us at Gorkana, and please do send us your feedback. Finally, all I want to say is thank you very much for listening in. See you next time. The webinar is now over.